Ladies, gentlemen, and heroes of all ages, I've been playing Deadlock for just over a month now. I started just before the whole NDA lifting thing and the big boom of players that came to the game too. And I've got to admit, I'm one of the people who just absolutely instantly became obsessed with the game when I started playing it. I was playing it, watching it, learning about it all the time. I know we're pre-alpha, but this game is just truly something special that hits my addictive personality very, very deeply. That aside, you're not here to hear about my feelings with the game on a personal level, but just to give you the context that I have over 130 hours playing the game within 1 month of access, and plenty of time outside of that just watching and learning from other players too. And today I want to go over my Deadlock hero tier list, with the note that a lot of the time I see tier lists out there for the game, they are specifically for high MMR or specifically for new players, because those are generally what those types of players want to actually talk about. So I'm trying to come at this a little bit differently, trying to frame it more for the average player, closer to the middle of things, closer to average MMR and expected performance as a result of that. And so a lot of my placements will be made with that in mind. And I should also mention that I think the balance in this game is generally quite tight, even for this stage of development. There are some outliers, sure, but no hero is truly unplayable, and no hero is genuinely broken either, at least not after they nerfed Kelvin in the patch on Thursday. So this list is all the heroes compared between each other, rather than calling them literally bad or good. That said, let's go through this from bottom to top, and in the D tier I have McGinnis. Even after recent buffs in the patch last Thursday to her healing circle ability, the main thing with McGinnis is her playstyle generally, for the most part, just isn't great for team fighting. You can build gun McGinnis, but there are far better characters with better guns or toolkits surrounding them to actually build gun damage around, and spirit damage McGinnis is pretty much all in the turrets or the ult, both of which definitely have their place, and I wouldn't say they're outright bad, but turrets take time to set up, cannot move, and have limited health. A good enemy team that understands how to play against McGinnis will either immediately shoot the turrets as you put them down, or just refuse to fight in an area that you already have a bunch of turrets set up in to begin with. Either situation significantly neuters your effectiveness. The wall, however, is always good if you're good at using it, but that's not enough to make up for a whole kit. Then in the C tier, I have Bebop, and I hate that I had to do this because I absolutely goddamn love Bebop personally. I'm a big Bebop enjoyer. Gun bop, bomb bop, bolt bop, doesn't matter. He's super fun. He's the character in the game with a hook that you can use as a skill shot to pull enemies in from a ridiculously long range. Then you have a super short range bomb that can infinitely scale damage by gaining a buff each time that it damages any enemy heroes. And you have the uppercut to knock enemies away at close range, which was buffed in the recent patch to now no longer prevent momentum, which significantly improves the general Bebop combo of hook, turn around, bomb, punch them back towards your stuff, towards your people, towards your guardians, whatever it is. Not to mention, this also allows you to be a lot more creative with the uppercut, like dash jumping behind an enemy that is pushing your guardian and then uppercutting them directly into said guardian, which they might not expect, to make them take a chunk of bonus damage. The main reason that Bebop is down in C tier, however, is because compared to any other CC-based hero, you have to hit pretty much every single hook over a game to have a similar effect over the long term. Not to mention, you also have to hit them on actually squishy people that you can actually kill as a result of this if your team's paying attention. You have to be good about how you use your bombs, and you have to be very careful with your uppercuts too, as uppercut and hook can affect not only enemies, but also allies. The thing is though, that can of course also be used for good reasons on occasion, like saving a friendly who's in far too deep, but this all quite is just a high skill ceiling conversation. And that's why he's here on a list that I'm talking about for more average players, because even if you truly genuinely are good enough to hit every Bebop hook as a skill shot, then there are simply a number of other characters you could have a higher impact on in the game. Even if Bebop is fun as all hell, and the recent changes to his ult have made it way better, but that still puts him in a sort of 7 category where the ult is a bit of a noob trap that can be countered very easily with items later in the game. Then next up in the C tier is Infernus, and this one I can explain relatively simply. His kit is super strong. If you let him build up his afterburn debuff on you in laning phase, he will outpoke you extremely consistently. He has a stun in the form of his ult, though it is best used as a secondary engage or a counter to other strong ults during a pre-existing fight, rather than running in with it as a frontliner for an initiation. Once you get things like Ricochet and Toxic Bullets as items, you can become just an insane damage machine, spreading debuffs to the whole enemy team from the back line. But there are a lot of characters who can can build to this sort of level of hyper carry power with enough souls, and Infernus is simply the one of them that takes the most souls to get there, or in other words, the longest time to get there. And in a game where every moment of efficiency makes a difference, the carry that takes the longest time to get online and to be strong enough for proper team fighting is the carry that will perform the worst overall, especially without team coordination to sort of stall a game out until your Infernus is strong enough and ready to go. Then we move up to the B tier, and here I've got Warden. He has a great kit. Honestly, Alchemical Flask is severely underrated by newer players, but this applies a damage reducing debuff to enemies that it hits and removes some stamina from them too. Stamina is one of those things that is underutilized in lower level play, but ridiculously important in high level play. The difference in movement is the easiest way to tell how comfortable a player is in Deadlock, and almost all movement tricks require you to have stamina. So put simply, this is better as an ability against better players. Warden's actual potential scales upwards with the skill of your opponent. This in combination with his anchor ability to reduce the enemy's actual ability to escape the radius before it locks them in place gives them a pretty deadly combo. If you are actually able to track your enemy's stamina, if you watch them dash and pay attention to it, you can in fact do a lot with this, and you have to catch them out like that as a result. But again, that's sort of a skill thing, and if you have him in a dual lane and laning phase, it can really just destroy people if you coordinate with your second player. For those reasons, Warden I think is easily up in A tier in a high MMR setting where the player themselves is extremely comfortable and confident with their kit, and there's some teamwork involved in coordination with the rest of the members of the team. But the lower the skill bracket of your game and the less coordinated your team is, the worse he is as a hero. So I think in a more average game, B is a pretty correct placement. Then we have Haze, and this is where I expect to see a lot of feedback on both sides. Haze is one of the most potentially oppressive heroes in the game. The most popular builds for her go all in on the ultimate ability, where she spins around shooting her guns at just an insane fire rate, and the general combo is to build Silencer so you can silence the people that get hit by the ultimate, and Unstoppable so you can't be stunned while you're doing your ultimate, and then get something like Ricochet to make your bullets and your fixation stacks bounce around and hit multiple targets, and then you can just lifesteal from them and so on and so forth, and this just makes you an absolute menace in team fights if the enemy doesn't counter it. Metal Skin, Ethereal Shift, even Warp Stone or Superior Stamina. All of these, or even something like just getting Curse and applying it to Haze before she starts the combo, or focusing her with your stuns before she actually hits Unstoppable and getting rid of her at the start of a fight. All of these are very viable counters, either items or gameplay concepts that you can use to focus her down to make her as a character far weaker than she can be. Not to mention her laning phase is actually relatively weak, and she also has to build up some items to start farming properly to begin with. Haze is a new player killer. She thrives in low MMR games and gets countered heavily in high MMR games. So on average, I think especially as people gain the knowledge required of how to counter her as a character, this is probably the right spot to put her. After that, I have Ivy, and Ivy is in a perfectly decent spot in my mind. Using the ultimate to carry Spirit Iron players from spawn to delivery in a matter of seconds with the help of a second player is a massive plus in her favor. Her healing and buffing potential is extremely high. She has a stun that also acts as iframes to let her dodge dangerous attacks or effects, and also heals her on use, which is quite solid. Then on top of just a solid gun in general too. She has 4 base starting stamina, which is insane, and also inherent Fleetfoot inbuilt to the character, meaning she does not get a movement penalty while she shoots. All of this makes her surprisingly good against newer players, and she still has a place in higher MMR games too, but generally there are other characters you'd rather have to fill the same sort of roles with current balance, unless you're just a really good one-trick Ivy. After that is Lady Geist, who got a reasonable buff in the recent patch, both improving the functionality of her Malice skill, the projectile that stacks a damage amp on the enemy's hit, and increasing the damage and scaling for Essence Bomb, which is her nuking burst grenade. She does good damage if you can hit your skills properly, she lives for a long time if you use your abilities right too, and she can do some fun stuff with the ultimate swapping health with people, but for the most part her kit just lacks a certain oomph that the characters in higher tiers have in my opinion, and that oomph in this case is generally crowd control of some descript to actually lock people down. That said, next up is Grey Talon to cap off the B tier. The one skill, the Charged Shot, is absolutely nasty strong when you build around it correctly, but it is basically a bit of a win more type of ability. If you are behind, it won't do much, but if you are ahead, it will shred people from a mile away. The owl is incredible for letting you farm or push a lane far away from a team fight, but still have an impact when you send an owl over to join in, or even clean up kills on a fight that's happening 2 lanes away from you, or just distract people. You can let you actually split push with it in certain situations too. It just lets you affect the game without being there physically, putting yourself in danger. And on top of being a large amount of damage and an execute at max upgrades, as well as giving you permanently stacking spirit power if you kill with it, it is also a fairly large AoE stun that you can use to help teammates in a fight. His kit is generally very solid just in general, but again, I feel like I would rather have the other options above him on the list at this stage if I was given the choice. With that then, we enter the A tier, and these are the heroes that you'll commonly see just run away with a game on all MMR rankings if they are left unchecked and played well. Starting with Pocket, they are possibly the most mechanically dense hero in the game. Various combos to boost effectiveness, like sending out your Phantom, hopping in the briefcase, then teleporting to burst the briefcase on top of an enemy, and then ulting on them, but also you can time this mid-fight because the briefcase reloads your gun, so on and so forth. There's just so many little bits of tech. They have just a ridiculous skill ceiling as a character, but also a relatively high skill floor too, to really be decent enough to make proper use of the full kit. For an average player, if you go hard on only learning Pocket and playing Pocket, A tier feels about right. But a really good Pocket can easily reach S tier if you're good enough. Same thing goes for the next entry, which is Lash, another of my personal favorites. Lash has some of the highest mobility potential in the game, and if you are good at using that correctly to split push lanes but then also be in a fight, it will actually make a massive difference on the sort of macro of it all. He has Flog as an ability, which is a fantastic source of self-healing, Ground Slam, which is momentum scaling damage, which not only does massive damage if you know how to use it properly, where to stand on buildings and such to line them up, but recently this was buffed to have another better damage scaling part to it. It has aim control while you are mid-slam as well, and also this ability does knock enemies into the air when you hit them as a sort of mini CC effect. Not to mention, one of the best ults in the game in the right situations, with Death Slam, able to completely turn the tides on things like mid-boss, or throw enemies under Guardians or Walkers or into Fountain, into a 7 ult, into a Dynamo Black Hole. There are just an unbelievable amount of combos you can do with Lash with some good team coordination. So again, this is one where the skill ceiling is immense, and he can easily be S tier in the hands of a fantastic player. But for the average game, I'd say this is more likely about where he sits as a hero. Then we have Paradox, and again, sort of the same thing applies here. The charge shot is one of the strongest abilities in the game, applying spirit damage as a multiplier of weapon damage, which double dips in quite a few bonuses, applying a sort of time lag, time stop effect that slows the enemy down ridiculously. Not quite a stun, doesn't interrupt things, but literally just slows an immense amount, and this also just does a ton of damage. Paradox also gets a wall that significantly slows projectiles, and you can use this to trade favorably in lane. They get a pulse grenade, which is great for controlling areas, and then of course there is the paradoxical swap ultimate, which is an aimed projectile that, if this hits the enemy, will slowly swap places between the two of you, during which the enemy takes damage and you can throw them into your team through a wall, into a grenade. The possibilities are honestly pretty endless, and if you are a Paradox player who hits 100% of your charge shots and 100% of your paradoxical swaps, then you probably make it all the way up to S+++ tier. Honestly, it does have that much potential impact, but the skill requirement to reach that point is quite high, and if you miss the swap and you miss the charge shot, you'll provide barely any value at all to your team in a fight. So again, on the concept of an average game, this is probably the most accurate position in my mind. Next up is Wraith, another personal favorite of mine, just incredibly strong laning phase, even with the recent nerf to her base card damage. Fantastic weapons, and her card ability basically just, rather than having a proper cooldown, instead recharge as you do damage to enemy troopers or heroes. Teleport that scales to insane distances as well as part of her kit, and it gets even further range at higher levels. A fire rate boosting ability that also affects allies around you like a mini intrinsic heroic aura, and then an ult that starts as a massive single target lockdown that gives her just free kills in lane basically, and late game scales to be able to lock down an entire team if you use it correctly, and can even do things like capture a rejuvenator that you have absolutely no business picking up because you just walked in and pressed your ultimate at the right time. She is just plain incredibly strong, generally good, no ridiculous skill requirement to using her in the first place, but there is a reasonable amount of nuance to getting properly good at it, and importantly, when considering her use in average games, her gun damage lets you focus objectives hard, and the fire rate boost also affecting allies basically lets you mow down through Guardians or Walkers whenever your team has the position person to do so. And in a lot of games that are lower MMR without much coordination, the best thing you can do to affect a game is absolutely obliterate buildings with gun damage. After that is Yamato, and this is one that I find a bit hard to place just because she is one with a high skill ceiling, but also a really high skill floor. If you aren't great at Yamato, there are a bunch of other heroes that are easier to be more effective with, but if you can hit all of your sword slashes, if you choose when to engage and who to engage on correctly, if you're able to make proper use of the left click to last hits and deny, and the right click for general hero poking from longer ranges, because left click is still great at close range but not great far away, and if you know how to actually use your insane level of tankiness and survivability with the lifesteal and the ult actually around team fighting, rather than just selfishly trying to 1v6 with it, you can have an incredible amount of impact. If you are great with Yamato, maybe even up to S tier, but if you're bad with Yamato, you can very easily sort of just grief your team. So for the average games, I think this is probably pretty fair. Then finally, to finish off the A tier is Seven. Seven is sort of a god in low MMR gameplay. His ult will kill new players endlessly, over and over and over again the whole game. Seven is bad, though, in high MMR gameplay, because people have good knowledge of movement and the map layout, which lets you easily get away from his ult super quickly with line of sight. People have more awareness and concept of if you can take the fight and kill him through his lifesteal, or if you need to run. And importantly, with knowledge also comes counters. Things like movement items or defensive items that let you just basically ignore the ult and then fight when it's over, or abilities that stun that you specifically save for when Seven comes to the fight. That said, the best way to run Seven when the ult stops working is to build around the 3, which is sort of his inbuilt Tesla bullets buff. You can still do a lot of work with Seven with this, but his main skill in high MMR is that he's just great at farming. But with the ult being generally counterable and his main method of CC having an absolutely massive delay on it, a 7 with a ton of souls is just less valuable to a team than most other heroes once you're above the sort of player skill threshold where the ult gets avoided and ignored. But again, in new player lobbies, he's absolutely dominant, and in average games, he's above average as a hero, which is why I have him where I do. Then we move up to the S tier, and the heroes here and above I would always be happy to see on my team and usually would not be excited to face off against as my opponents. This starts with Vindicta at the top, especially after the recent patch changes. Her stake ruining opponents to a specific area is great crowd control for a carry to have, especially one with vertical mobility and a great weapon to pair with it. The Raven bleed dot is incredibly strong if you build into it. The floating in the air move can be extremely good, but does have the ability to be countered by certain heroes like Kelvin or Lash. But the big thing with Vindicta is if you put points into the ult, it will literally create souls that do not otherwise exist in the game, by giving bonus souls to you and now also your allies that get assists if you kill an enemy with assassination, and I cannot express how important this is, because there are simply normally a finite number of souls on the map at any given time. The trooper waves, the jungle, the bosses, things like that, and hero kills are another way to generate souls. But if you get a bonus 600 souls from a kill, even if you trade evenly with the enemy team in every other aspect of the game, you will still be notably ahead of them as a team. And this firmly entrenches Vindicta in the S tier to me, no matter what skill level you play at, really. After that is Abrams, and for new players, Abrams is just the melee bully. All he does is melee people, and he wins games doing it because people don't yet know how to parry. Once you hit more mid-skill games, people will have learned how to parry, and the Abrams players start to realize how good his shotgun actually is if you don't just punch people. But in these super high-level games, Abrams is still a menace. Yes, he does still punch occasionally, and people will try and parry him, and there is a fun counterplay to that, and the way that you can avoid parries by turning your melee around and then getting them while the cooldowns going. But the build for Abrams in high level is mostly based around his gun, because his gun is really good. And the reason he is still so heavily used and abused is because of his toolkit and what his abilities actually are. When you break it down simply, he has a healing ability, a movement ability that also is a stun, another healing ability, and then an AoE stun with a ton of movement potential too. So across 4 abilities, he essentially has 2 heals, 2 stuns, and 2 movement options, and a lot of other utility gained from all of these things as well, depending on how well you use them. And that is just an absolutely insane toolkit to have compared to most other heroes in the game. Next up is Maurice and Krill, another personal favorite of mine. The gun is insane for laning phase, shotguns are great for denies as are high fire rate weapons, and this is a high fire rate shotgun, so it's really hard to beat for that. Not to mention the tankiness in general and the restorative power of Scorn as an ability make him able to favorably trade with most any hero that tries to fight close up early on. And you have an unbelievably strong start too. Then he has a healing ability. Burrow is insanely good movement as well as damage when you upgrade it. He has a long-range disarm that can totally ruin like a flying Vindicta or Grey Talon, who then just has to float there doing nothing, trying to rain down damage from above but unable to. And he has the big sort of fuck you in particular ability, which is Combo, which he doesn't even have to aim. It is a locked target grab that stuns the target for 3.5 seconds once upgraded, and that's without even counting items into the equation. This is one of the best engages for a team fight if you use it right, especially because you can specifically look at the enemy team, see who has the highest farm, and grab them before they can do anything scary, while your team just fully focuses them down and executes them before the fight begins. You can be 20k souls behind the top player in the lobby, and if you are Mo and Krill, you still have an insane potential to impact in a fight by grabbing the big player and shutting them down instantly. It's simple as that. Then we have Shiv, and he's really strong with a fair bit of nuance to him. The Shivs themselves, the throwing knives, can be pretty oppressive. He generates a ton of them very quickly, and he can just throw them at you repeatedly, and if you are decent enough at aiming them, then they will do a ton of damage over time, which also leads to self-healing later on in the game for him. Once he has his ult unlocked and his rage meter, he has the potential to gain a ton of damage amp during fights too, and with the right setup, a good Shiv is capable of 1v6ing the entire enemy team if played perfectly, but in a more average situation, he is still honestly an S-tier hero. His general damage and survival potential is just really strong, as is his kit in general, not to mention late game having a cooldown, resetting execute can absolutely swing entire team fights by a massive amount as well. Finishing off the S tier then is Viscus. Viscus was nerfed in a few ways in the recent patch, but his general kit is just way too good to ignore, even without considering high MMR players. The splatter is a ton of damage and it's great for farming, but fantastic at like indoor team fights, especially because of the bounces when upgraded. The Goo Cube has super high skill ceiling as a skill, from the simple use of just healing in lane phase to letting you trade with your opponents, more to things like canceling Bebop bombs or Wraith ults on teammates. There's a ton that you can do with this. The Fist is extremely high skill ceiling as well for controlling a fight or even actual self-movement, and the Goo Ball ultimate is either one of the greatest movement tools letting you get around the map super quickly, or an incredibly strong catch and lockdown tool you can do to stop an enemy from escaping or running away, or if you get like the dream scenario of the enemies are all in the mid-boss pit and you enter ball mode, just pinballing off the side of the tiny arena, bouncing between them, stunning them on repeat, that's the dream. As well, Viscus relatively recently gained an alt fire for their weapon that fires explosive globs that let you hit enemies that are behind cover, so that's also pretty solid too. Then we come to the S+++ tier to finish it off, and these are just sort of the heroes that will make any team infinitely stronger if you are at least decent at playing them. Starting off with what I think is just the strongest hero in the game and another personal favorite of mine to play, Dynamo. His first ability is a knock-up that scales its range with your spirit power, so you can get it up to nearly 100 meters if you fully stack into it with a late game setup. This basically pops up a whole lane in front of you in line of sight. His quantum entanglement acts as iframes to counter all sorts of debuffs or ultimates, and he can bring in any nearby allies with him to help protect both of you at the same time, which is pretty nuts. And then he has a healing aura around him on a cooldown, which is incredibly impactful, and of course it goes without saying that he has the black hole ultimate, sucking every nearby player into him and CCing them for a long period of time, and this straight up wins team fights. It wins games if you use it correctly, and there is no better way to say it. Of course, more team coordination makes Dynamo even better, but I think he is a hero that if played right can carry anywhere from low MMR to high MMR, even in lobbies where you are a solo player, as long as you have teammates that are willing to play somewhat close to you and are somewhat reactive when you use the black hole. His kit is insanely strong, and his weapon is still really good too, even so. And finally then we have Kelvin. Kelvin was in this tier before the recent patch, honestly, and in the recent patch he was nerfed, and I think he is probably still here even so. The nerf to the fire rate slowing of his beam has made him a bit less oppressive, but it can still apply apply up to 70% movement slow on players, which is fantastic for either getting full-on early game kills or just pressuring enough that you will get yourself trooper advantage and get more last hits and denies as a result, as well as letting you actually spread out to other lanes. The Frost Grenade is great for burst, and it can do insane healing as well if you build around healing with it. The Ice Path is one of the best movement abilities in the game, full stop. It is fantastic for Spirit Urn delivery, it's great for split pushing, great for getting to team fights, and allies can even follow along the Ice Path with a movement speed buff, so you can fully transfer a team from one place to another with increased speed. Then we have the Dome, his ultimate, and the Dome was also nerfed recently to no longer be able to encase objectives and let you freely actually take them, but it's still insanely good even so. It can save allies' lives with the health regen from it, it can counter things like 7 ult or Haze ult, it can create a wall between allies and enemies, it can single out high value enemy targets with some of your allies in it, and honestly I think the Dome is by far his highest skill requirement ability, because an incredible Dome will swing a fight, but a terrible Dome will do the same in the opposite direction. So overall, just absolutely incredible kit for a hero, really hard to have any other negatives to say, honestly. That just about does it for today then, everyone. My thoughts and rankings of the Deadlock hero roster as it currently stands, with the idea of trying to hit how they feel in a relatively average MMR game. Let me know your own thoughts down below, if you think I'm right or I'm wrong and why, and of course let us know if you'd like any other sort of Deadlock content in the future, as this isn't exactly the normal type of game that we talk about on this channel, but all three of us that do the videos here have been just playing it and enjoying it in our spare time for weeks now, and so we wanted to give it a go. I hope you've enjoyed this then, and best of luck in your games until I see you again. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.